Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Demon Folklorist. Yep, that's me. I'm the Demon Folklorist. So today we're going to be talking about Voodoo, Hoodoo, and Conjure versus the media depictions of them and why they are so horrifically, terribly wrong. So, I'm going to start with Haitian Voodoo. This is a religion, and that's really the main difference between Voodoo and Hoodoo. Voodoo is a religion, Hoodoo is magic. And then Conjure is like Hoodoo from a different area. Haitian Voodoo is a religion with the Loa as intermediaries for God, who they call Bonje. They see Bonje as being way too busy for day-to-day issues, so you call the Loa to help you out and help carry your requests up to God himself. They can help you just in your day-to-day life. Satan also, I might add, doesn't actually exist in Voodoo. And then the way that you have a relationship with the Loa is that you give them offerings and they bring your needs before Bonje, who grants them the permission to help you. Voodoo proper is actually an African Creole religion that began in Africa. Then it was adapted to the forced removal into the American South. Their religion then adapted to Catholicism, which was pushed on them. So it's very similar to Haitian Voodoo, but it's not exactly the same. Conjure is simply magic from another part of the South. Magic has always had this really long history of being maligned and associated with the devil. Most people would be surprised to know that voodooists don't even believe in the devil. More than that, the devil's more likely to appear in voodoo folklore as a way to sell your soul to get something, but not in the actual religion itself. And conjurers use a variety of tools, mostly plants, animals, minerals from that area. The Bible is also used. So passages are read and used during ritual work. Catholicism and African practices become combined to be what it is now. And Voodoo is also interesting because it's seen as a uniquely New Orleans Southern fixture, and it's thought to be straight from Haitian refugees and or the enslaved. But there's evidence it existed as early as 1730 in Louisiana. But it didn't actually grow into its full self until the Haitians were forced to come to the U.S. It also wasn't unique to New Orleans at all, but practiced all throughout the Mississippi Valley. A major difference between New Orleans voodoo and Haitian voodoo is that the Loa aren't as much a part of voodoo as we think of it. It's more a fixture of Haiti because voodoo tends to talk to the ancestors and the dead, because the dead are a huge part of voodoo and are lesser deities and saints. The dead and Loa live on the same island apart from the living. And Papa Legba has to open the door so that there's even communication between us and the dead or the Loa. The formal definition of hoodoo is that it's folk magic found along the Mississippi. It has very little to do with deities or religion, but very much more in the realm of cunning folk with healing and witchcraft. And cunning folk were the people who tended to deal in that sort of thing. They had that sacred knowledge that was passed down through usually their families to heal others and to cure witchcraft being done against oneself. And they're very much in the realm of trying to tell or change one's fate in hoodoo, so the spells had a lot to do with day-to-day life and problems, so the charms would be like good luck, protection, money, love, that sort of thing. Hoodoo is made up of 5 results: punishment, diagnosis or divination, curing or redressing, protection from voodoo and evil forces, and good fortune. So that's mainly what they're really doing. They're generally trying to protect people from the types of evil magic that could possibly ruin your life. And it can be argued that in Western culture, we do a lot of the same things, like evil eye pendants, a lucky rabbit's foot, and any way that you use an object in some way to help you in your daily life. So I happen to wear a labradorite over my chest and Super 7 crystals on my left arm to deflect negative chaotic energies away from me because I have the worst luck in the entire world. And once I started doing these 2 things, it stopped. Also, not everything in hoodoo is a complex ritual. Like any practice, the ritual is as complex or not inform as the practitioner decides. So it could literally be something as simple as writing down what you want and asking a saint to help you with this, right? Or it could be like an entire 12-step spell where you have to do all these different things just to ensure that you get the correct result. And yeah, that's up to the conjurer. There's also a certain level of contagious magic. In Hoodoo, they use sometimes menstrual blood, clothes, in cursing, or they use fingernails, hair to bring about an intended effect. When you can't get these direct materials, the things that the person touched will work, or with poppets, which is sympathetic magic, meaning that you use something that was just a representation of that person. Voodoo dolls aren't actually a thing. It is something that I feel like media created based on the idea of poppets. And then contagious magic, of course, is something that comes directly from the person's body. Certain times of the day are super powerful in Hoodoo, like sunrise and sunset. There are certain places of power that can be used in ritual, like crossroads. They're a powerful symbol and place. And it comes up a lot in almost this universal folklore of the crossroads are the right place for something because it's such a liminal space. It's neither here nor there, is it? And though Hoodoo is very much in practice, the naming has changed. Sometimes people call it voodoo to draw in customers who are usually white and don't know the difference, who might construe their titles as hoodoo doctors, or it's something that they call themselves. That because they don't like the older terms, because they're a connection to the old ways that they feel now have evolved, and then a rejection of old stereotypes. Now, conjure is similar in definition to hoodoo as being magic, but in other parts of the US. So it's an older, almost outdated term that was used most often in the 19th century. More recently, I've heard the term root worker or root work, so that's another term used for this type of magic. And as far as Voodoo, Hoodoo, and Conjure, I recommend the book Hoodoo, Voodoo, and Conjure, a handbook by Jeffrey E. Anderson. It's a great introductory text for people who might not understand the difference between the three, but who want to learn. And then we also have Marie Laveau, who everybody knows is the Voodoo Queen, Conjure Woman herself. She's actually two people that had the same name, a mother and a daughter, and they led voodoo processions. Her folklore is so prolific that it's hard to find real sources on her. I recommend Voodoo Queen, The Spirited Lives of Marie Laveau by Martha Ward. My teacher had us read it in grad school folklore class, so it's a little more factual. A lot of other books, when you have a case or a person that's sensationalized, they tend to be very folklore based, as in the person didn't do very much research. They just decided that, oh, well, the folklore's out there, that's good enough. And it's like, well, there is such a thing as folklore being not true. Just because it's in the world doesn't mean that's the true story. I highly commend people who actually go after the truth and try to find the real story. Because sometimes, past a certain point, there isn't a separation that can be found between the folklore and the real story because nobody knows the real story anymore. And that is kind of sad. The Laveaus were free women of color of Creole descent who were influential from antebellum times. So this was about 1815 to 1861 until 1881 when Marie I died. And then, of course, her daughter took over the voodoo procession. So spirit possession is a really common practice in voodoo. It's the act of allowing the Loa, if it's Haitian voodoo, or the spirits to possess your body and sometimes give messages or to simply dance in a ritual. It's supposed to be an ecstatic experience and very willing. It's not forced. I feel the fear comes from the idea of having one's body forcibly taken from them instead of willingly given. And it's for a short period of time. This is not like the Loa are just with you now and you can't get them out or anything like that. And then, yeah, they leave because why would they do that to you? It's not nearly as scary as the idea of, like, say, demonic possession, where the demon's totally going to try to take over your body and do whatever it is that they do. Honestly, demonic possession isn't even as prolific as these horror movies and these TV shows would have us believe. They are not common. Anyway, back to Marie Laveau. People still beg for her intercession in their lives and carve crosses on her grave. Marie I is buried in New Orleans' oldest graveyard, and they end up bringing her gifts. And then while this was happening, you have to remember that white people feared voodoo and the freedom it gave these people who might have been free technically, but were viewed as lesser people than the white people who lived during this horrible time in history. They also worried that this voodoo religion would spread to the enslaved and encourage rebellion, like what happened in Haiti. So, yeah, like you've got all of these different things, and this demonization of voodoo probably began then just because they didn't want their slaves to be like, oh, this is the key to our freedom. We could totally unite and rise up against these horrible people who have enslaved us, you know? So they started talking about how it's demon worship and witchcraft and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, actually, it's just something you don't understand. So let's get into some media. First, we're going to talk about The Princess and the Frog. Now, I love The Princess and the Frog, okay? But I am the first to admit that it is not a perfect movie. And it's because a lot of the information that exists on voodoo isn't necessarily accurate, like I was saying before with the folklore. Like, voodoo becomes heavily maligned and then also associated with hoodoo in general. There were a lot of factual inaccuracies within this movie that are really disappointing, because I know later in Pixar they started actually talking to those cultures and asking the real questions and have folklore consultants. This might have just been right before they started doing that, but still, it's a little disappointing just because of how widespread this is. Also, I love Tiana. She works so hard. She makes her dreams come true. And I love that. I love that there is a princess who wasn't just born a princess. She became one mostly because she was focused on her dreams and what she wanted. And she just went on this crazy adventure, you know? All right. So we all know that The Princess and the Frog is riddled with problems. Like, if you've been listening the last couple years, it's not good, some things. I love Bayou stories, including horror movies, because I think New Orleans has a rich cultural background that's full of mysteries. But it's also a place with an insanely dark history, and we have to acknowledge that because it was once a slave port. And there was a lot of slave trading that went in and out of New Orleans, and it was awful. There's this line between authenticity and abuse in folklore, and we need to be representing these people the way they would like to be represented instead of how other people see them. So this whole idea of like the backwoods, rednecks, like that in itself is super offensive. But also, why is the bayou assumed to be bad? In movies, it certainly has secrets and shitty people, but so does everywhere else. I don't think the bayou is worse than any other place in the world. And then we're not showing enough, back to that backwoods redneck thing, like we're not showing enough of the Creole culture. We're just showing stereotypes, like the little firefly Ray. He's Cajun, but also portrayed to be quite backwoods and redneck and all that stuff. Like, it even comes down to the way his teeth are shaped. And it's like, Cajun people and Creole people are much more than that. And that's what I would like to see in the future if Pixar ever does anything else with the Creole culture. That's what I want to see. So hoodoo and voodoo, you know, once again, they're not the same. Hoodoo is magic, which is what the Shadow Man, who is like the antagonist of this movie, that's what he seems to be mainly working with, though I do see a little bit of Loa imagery in there. But the distinction isn't made. Voodoo is a religion with deities and ritual, and hoodoo and conjure are in the realm of magic. And when you conflate the two, people just start to take that as fact. Now, obviously, this is a movie, but you'd be surprised how many times people go to a movie and they assume that what they're seeing is real because they don't know any different, right? And I'm sure this movie pissed off a lot of people from that area who were like, besides that that's not even right, why are you showing us this way? This isn't who we are. Like, there shouldn't be all this, like, weird fear being projected onto us about how we're just rednecks who are just going to kill you, you know, that sort of thing. And there's also, like, calavera imagery, which is skull imagery, which you see a lot in Dia de Muertos. And what I mean by that is, like, that's just shorthand for El Dia de los Muertos, which is the Day of the Dead from Mexican culture. So it's kind of weird to see it there. And those two cultures are completely separate. Not only that, the entire thing is somewhat cartoonish for for animation when the Loa are quite powerful. I'm pretty sure that the Shadow Man is using Hoodoo, and they keep calling it voodoo. You know, once again, back to the original point, like, don't do that. There's also tiki imagery, which, you know, Hawaiian, and I'm like, why is this happening? Why do you guys keep, like, conflating all of these different cultures? This is a mix of voodoo concepts that are steeped in other countries' imagery, but also the magic being used would be hoodoo, except it doesn't sound like hoodoo. Hoodoo's committed, once again, to solving normal problems, so the overblown changing of one's body is like almost like a voodoo concept, except it doesn't have this fundamental understanding of spirit possession. So it's just weird and inaccurate, and it makes me mad. Also, Tiana herself calls the Shadow Man the voodoo witch doctor, and none of that's correct, Tiana. Also, the Shadow Man is dressed incorrectly with color correspondences as far as the Loa, but it's never like outright said what Loa he worships. The Loa do bargain, but it's not in the way it's presented. And they're also really not interested in souls. They don't release dark spirits. They don't do that sort of thing. They're more of a good thing. Like, they're trying to help you, and they're not going to release dark spirits because they're trying to help you. And then also the character of Mama Odie, she had spells and enchantments, so she's practicing hoodoo, not voodoo. Remember, voodoo's a religion, hoodoo's magic. There was also some outright racism that I don't think they addressed very well. You know, like, I get the whole thing now of trying to sort of paper over society's sins, in that, like, we present a newer, better future for children, in that racism isn't a thing, and, you know, populating historical backgrounds with all kinds of people of color. I totally see why people are doing this, and it's not a bad thing, exactly. It's more like, my only real fear is that if we don't tell the real stories, they will repeat in another form. So this movie, when there are these two white guys, they're the bankers, and she is trying to buy this old sugar mill to turn into her restaurant, which is the only thing she wants. And they say something to her like, oh, you know, a big restaurant like that would have been too difficult for a little woman of your background. Like, the racism of this time, and the sexism actually, is filtering through, even though there's this wonderful friendship between Lottie and Tiana, which probably wouldn't have been possible in the actual 1920s. Like, so why are they insinuating that by saying that to her in the first place? Why are we putting it in there for making a new history anyway? If not that, meaning what? Her being poor? Classicism is also bullshit, because Tiana works harder than anybody. You know, like, I guess I just don't get where they were going with this, because that seems super racist, while also sort of papering over the racist past. So it's like, it's kind of like, pick one. Like, either this is the new future where that doesn't exist, or this does exist and we need to outright address it. But Disney has this really bad habit of looking back to the past and being like, oh, well, no, that's not a thing that was happening then. And it's like, yes, it was. And you guys just, instead of saying what happened and trying to teach a lesson about that sort of thing, you're just ignoring it. And this happened really heavily in The Haunted Mansion, which was basically an antebellum story about a man who fell in love with, most likely, one of the enslaved. And there was this whole like, oh, they were from different worlds and they couldn't be together and all this shit. And I was just like, my dude, do you know why they couldn't be together? Yeah, you can say it. Kids learn about slavery in schools, you know? I guess I didn't really like that approach. It's like, it's not even trying to present history in a better way so that that doesn't exist to kids. It's just like ignoring what really happened. So anyway, I have some issues with that one. There's an article about it on my website if you want to go check it out. Then we have The Skeleton Key, which is probably my favorite Bayou movie ever. They're mostly correct when Jill is talking to Caroline, and Jill is her black friend because Caroline's white and she doesn't understand like what voodoo and hoodoo is. Her friend says like, oh, you found yourself a hoodoo room. You know what hoodoo is? And Carolyn was like, it's like voodoo, right? And she's like, wrong. Voodoo is a religion. Slaves brought it to Haiti from Africa. You worship God, heaven, hell. Hoodoo is magic, African American folk magic. God's got nothing to do with it. Now, there are some major inaccuracies in what she's saying. Voodoo nor hoodoo involves hell or Satan. They don't exist. Only Bonje exists, and so do the spirits of the dead and ancestors. Also, there were the split differences between the different strains of the religion. We've got voodoo proper, we've got New Orleans voodoo, we've got Haitian voodoo, so it's not exactly correct that it just came from Africa, then Haiti, then here. So there are different things going on. They use a couple different things in this movie that are correct, like the brick dust being used as like a psychic barrier. It can't physically stop your enemies from walking in, but it can protect you against negative energies. And we see some Catholic imagery in the house, which is common because you're entreating one's saints to help you. Although hoodoo's not as big on this. That's more of a voodoo thing. But it does happen. Mirrors don't seem to be a thing in hoodoo. So if you've seen the skeleton key, you know that they took down all the mirrors in the house and they told Carolyn, oh, it's because you see ghosts in the mirror, right? And it could be true, but we don't actually find that out. What ends up happening is part of this hoodoo ritual to take Carolyn's remaining years from her by possessing her body forcefully. They use a mirror in the final ritual. So this type of hoodoo wouldn't necessarily work because it's thought that in hoodoo that it'll work, but not only if you believe, but if you deserve. That's kind of like the guiding principle behind hoodoo. But Ben and Carolyn don't actually deserve what happened to them. So Ben, the whole reason Carolyn's even there is because Ben, the husband, had some type of stroke up in the attic, and she's there to take care of him. And meanwhile, she starts to get these like really paranoid thoughts about the wife and that the wife somehow did this to the husband, right? Really, Ben and Caroline don't actually deserve what's happening. It's forced on them. Also, the whole concept of Papa Justify and Mama Cecile, they were once servants. This was back, I think, in the 1920s. So it wasn't exactly slavery, but it was pretty close. And they weren't treated well. So what they did was a hoodoo ritual during a big party and possessed the children of this banker who owned this house. And they took over their bodies and then, in a horrible act of violence, the banker and his friends, who we now know were the children. So they lynched them. And, that really just puts this in the realm of villainy. Because once you start messing like with children in any context, you're automatically the villain. Because this could have been easily seen as like a reclamation story. I also have another article that I wrote all about this on my website too, so go check it out. I feel that up until the moment that they took the children's lives away from them, that this was a reclamation tale because it's like these people had been abused on this plantation and they did hoodoo against these people. The banker shot his wife and then himself. And then, the children who were actually Mama Cecile and Papa Justify, they took over the plantation and now it's theirs. Like, it could easily be seen as them taking back the history that had previously enslaved their ancestors and then them in a different way. But no, they didn't go that route just because they took the children's lives, and then basically the children were murdered because of this. And they knew probably that this could happen. So, outright villainy. There's also this fear of involuntary possession that these stories about the bayou always seem to tell. The Loa possess people voluntarily to help them, to give them guidance. And also, the Loa are not human, right? It's not an evil process to claim someone else's body the way it comes to us in these bayou voodoo stories, right? It's from that lack of understanding that people are like, oh my gosh, this must be a sinister thing happening since something's taking over your body. And it's like, no, it's not. It really isn't. And y'all need to do better. I'm just saying, like, do more research, because it brings me to my next point. This is a movie that came out in the last few years and it's still not correct. And it was even done by a black director, So it's called The Reaper Man. I loved The Reaper Man, but there was this problem of slapping hoodoo into a movie and calling it voodoo. There was also a scene where there was some cultural appropriation happening of other religions, like the use of Native American sage, and not showing what real voodooist worship would even look like. And I don't even think voodoo or hoodoo deals with bringing back souls from the dead, which was featured heavily in the movie. That's how this guy he was murdered, and his grieving wife wants to bring him back, so she enlists the help of this voodoo woman. And yeah, like, these things, I feel that they're important. They deeply irk me. They're not as similar as you think they are. So that's my main thing. And then in Child's Play, which came out in 1988, they used the Loa Dambala as a figurehead for spirit possession, which I thought it was really odd that they chose him. Like, why Dambala? Because he's actually a primordial snake creator spirit. Like, he literally is in the form of a snake. It's actually Papa Legba who opens the doors and moves the spirits between dimensions. You know, so when you get Child's Play, which is all about the doll, like Chucky. The original story is that Charles Lee Ray, who was a serial killer, he had gotten involved in voodoo because he didn't want to die. Death is a very natural part of voodoo, by the way. Like, spirits of the dead are even worshipped. I don't know. I don't know where they're getting this information. But something that voodoo in media consistently gets wrong is the relationship between allowing the possession of the Loa to come through and give messages in ritual form, and then what forced possession, like by demons, looks like. So this is sort of like a forced possession, but it's of an empty vessel, right? So Charles E. Ray, he gets killed, or he gets shot in a toy store, and he decides, like, okay, I'll just grab one of these dolls, one of these empty vessels, and just possess it. And then this poor kid gets this doll for his birthday. It's the only thing he wanted, a good guy doll. And it turns out this good guy doll is actually quite bad. And what this was really about is actually a really genius parody about the toy consumption industry and how it directly advertises to children. And we talked about that a lot, me and my sister, in the Monstrous Brides episode, because it's fascinating, that whole concept. Like, it's actually completely unregulated. Toy companies are allowed to advertise to children, knowing full well that children do not understand money or a waste of time or any of these concepts that adults are utilizing when they say no to their children, right? So, yeah, like, I had some issues with it, because also voodoo dolls aren't real, and this movie's like directly being like, oh yeah, like voodoo dolls can like hurt you and all these things. And it's like, no, you're mistaking it for an actual magical practice that you're getting wrong. I guess my main takeaway from all this is really just an introduction to Hoodoo, Voodoo, and Conjure versus the media that's portraying it, is to just don't read into what the media is saying, because media almost never gets anything right. Let's just be honest. And then on top of that, do your own research, but you got to look in the right places. If anybody anywhere in a book says, like, oh yeah, voodoo dolls are real, put it down. That's not a thing, okay? It's not a book that you're going to want to go to. I would go look in folklore books, like the books I had mentioned, just because there is so much inaccuracy out there that I trust those books to give me the facts. And I wanted to pass them on just in case any of you are interested in this subject. And we need to do better. We need to do better research. We should talk to actual voodooists and ask them honestly about these things that we don't understand. Because, you know, it's a different culture and we should be respectful of that. And that's all I really wanted to say. And it makes me really mad when I watch even movies that come out right now that are getting this wrong consistently. It shouldn't be that way. You know, we have had enough time. There's enough research in the world now that I don't feel like we have a real excuse to get this wrong. So, do your own research. If you need more book recommendations, you can always ask me. I'm on Twitter. My handle is Demon Folklorist. If, you have questions or something you'd like to say, you can go on Spreaker.com, make a free account, and then leave a comment on my stuff, or you can tag me in something on Twitter. Like, I'm always happy to answer questions and to elaborate on things if you didn't quite understand. I would like to build some engagement here. Y'all are known, I don't know if you know this, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you probably don't, but y'all are the demon folk. That's what I call my listeners. So have a good day, demon folk. I hope your day is free of inaccuracies and that you start to absorb media with a much more critical eye when it comes to these subjects. Talk to you later about whatever comes to mind in my rabbit hole brain. See you later.